drowning in wine. Is it a decadent fantasy or a horrifying nightmare? Picture this: a man of royal blood gasping for air as sweet wine floods his lungs. This isn't a twisted fairy tale or an apparent legend. It's the real historical fate of a duke. In the dark bowels of the Tower of London, George Plantagenet met a death so bizarre and macabre that it shocks us even today. From the first moment you hear it, this story grabs you by the collar and won't let go. Why would anyone be executed in a vat of wine? And did he choose this fate himself? Stay tuned. The answers will leave you astonished and a little thankful we live in a different age. Right after that spine-chilling image, let's pull back and introduce our tale. George Plantagenet, the Duke of Clarence, wasn't just any noble. He was the brother of King Edward IV of England. Yes, a prince with the world at his feet. But his life took a treacherous turn, leading to an end that reads like dark fiction. Understanding how George ended up in such a deadly predicament isn't just about satisfying morbid curiosity. It shines a light on the brutal power struggles of the 15th century. This tale is a cautionary reflection on ambition, betrayal, and the horrifying extremes to which they can lead. So, how does a royal duke end up drowning in wine, and what can we learn from it? Let's dive into this dark chapter of history, no pun intended, and see why it still matters for us. Brace yourself. George's story might just change how you think about the saying, "Truth is stranger than fiction." To understand the end, we must glimpse the turbulent life that led George to that wine barrel. The stage is England in the 1470s, a time of betrayal, family feuds, and war. George Plantagenet was born into the notorious Wars of the Roses, an era when the throne of England was a prize fought over by two branches of the royal family. His eldest brother Edward wore the crown as King Edward IV, and for a while, George enjoyed the riches and titles that came with being kin to the king. He was Duke of Clarence, a high rank with lands and power. You'd think he had it made, but ambition is a dangerous beast. George wasn't satisfied living in his brother's shadow. He wanted more, maybe even the crown for himself. Can you imagine plotting against your own flesh and blood, the king? George could. In a move that shocked the kingdom, he allied with a powerful earl, Richard Neville, the kingmaker, and rebelled against King Edward. Brother against brother, sword against sword. It was a real-life game of thrones. For a time, George's betrayal helped topple Edward from the throne, but the wheel of fortune turned quickly. One moment, George was helping his brother. The next, he was betraying him, and then he came crawling back when his gambit failed. This young duke switched sides more than once, earning a reputation as fickle and untrustworthy. Each act of treason dug his grave a little deeper, even if he didn't know it yet. By 1477, King Edward IV had had enough of George's scheming. There's only so far you can push a brother, even a king. George had been implicated in plots, accused of whispering that Edward wasn't the rightful king, even dabbling in dark rumors of witchcraft and poisoning at court. The final straw. George dared to defy the law openly, prosecuting people without royal permission and threatening the stability of the realm. King Edward, heartbroken and furious, finally snapped. He ordered George's arrest and charged him with treason. Imagine the drama of that moment. The royal guards seizing the king's own brother, the shocked whispers in the palace halls. It was a point of no return. The trial was swift and grim. In January 1478, Parliament convened to seal George's fate. Edward himself pressed for the death sentence, a monarch condemning his sibling with a heavy heart and a stern face. Loyalty and love turned to lethal retribution. George Plantagenet, once second in line to the throne, was now a dead man walking. He was 28 years old. The sentence, execution. But how do you execute a royal duke without turning him into a martyr or causing a public spectacle? The answer came cloaked in secrecy and dripping with irony. George's execution would be carried out behind closed doors in the Tower of London's stone walls, away from the gawking crowds. No one could have imagined the peculiar method of death that would follow, and the bizarre rumors it would spark. Little did George know, the punishment awaiting him would be unlike anything England had seen. The stage was set for a most unusual execution, one that would ensure his name lived on in infamy. On a cold February day in 1478, deep within the Tower of London, George Plantagenet was led to his final doom. But there was no headsman's axe in sight, no noose, no firing squad, had those existed then. Instead, in the flickering torchlight, George beheld an object that must have made his blood run cold, a gigantic wooden barrel filled to the brim with wine. Not just any wine, Malmsey wine, a sweet, high-class vintage loved by the elites of the day. The sickly sweet aroma of wine filled the dungeon air, almost choking in its heaviness. It was the scent of celebration and revelry, now twisted into the prelude for murder. What was going through George's mind at that moment? Some say he thought it a cruel joke. Others claim he knew exactly what was coming. According to later legend, George was even allowed to choose his manner of death, and he wryly chose drowning in wine. Perhaps a final gesture of dark humor from a man who loved his drink. We can't know for sure if that's true, but imagine the scene. Two executioners, faces grim under shadowy hoods, rolling in the huge cask of wine. The barrel is enormous, a butt of Malmsey, over 100 gallons of liquid. That's nearly 500 liters, more than enough to engulf a grown man completely. The wine's surface gleams red and amber in the torchlight, deceptively inviting. George, in shackles, tries to keep his composure. Maybe he musters a weak joke about having one last drink. Maybe he's trembling head to toe, heart pounding like a drum. The tension is palpable. Without ceremony, the executioners seize the Duke. In an instant, terror becomes reality. They force him towards the open top of the barrel. George begins to panic, the instinct to survive overwhelming any last shred of composure. He resists, a scuffle ensues. But he's no match for two strong men. With a heave, they plunge him into the vat. The cold wine closes over George's head, and a muffled scream bubbles to the surface. Try to put yourself there for a second. The shock of freezing liquid surrounds you. Your lungs scream for air. You thrash blindly in the dark, claustrophobic sloshing of wine everywhere. The sweet scent of Malmsey becomes nauseating as you inhale it, desperately trying to breathe but only drawing in burning fluid. George's arms and legs flail out of the barrel as he's submerged, splashing wine onto the stone floor. One executioner holds his legs, another pushes down on his shoulders, ensuring the Duke does not surface. It's a ghastly, brutal scene, far quieter than a public beheading, but no less horrifying. The only sounds are George's muffled chokes and the creaking of the barrel as it rocks with his struggle. Imagine the visceral horror. The Duke's chest heaving, mouth opening in a silent plea, wine flooding into his lungs. The sensation would be like fire inside as the alcohol burns and the body fights futilely. After what feels like an eternity, the struggle slows. Bubbles stop rising. George Plantagenet is dead. His body goes limp, floating for a moment in the wine that killed him. The executioners lift him out, drenched and lifeless, wine streaming from his clothes and hair. Perhaps one of them coughs at the overpowering fumes or crosses himself at the sight of this unnaturally quiet corpse. The irony is unmistakable and chilling. A man who in life was known for his love of wine, drowned by wine. In that dark chamber, a prince of the royal blood met a fate so strange that it didn't seem real. For a moment, there is only silence. The kind of heavy silence that follows a nightmare or a tragedy. The deed was done. No blood was spilled, but the brutality was every bit as appalling as an executioner's axe. Word of this bizarre execution was never meant to leave the tower's walls. But how could a story like this stay hidden? Soon, whispers spread through the court and across the land. They killed the Duke of Clarence in a butt of Malmsey wine. People were aghast and morbidly fascinated. Can you blame them? It's the stuff of grim legend. In the taverns and marketplaces, no doubt the tale grew in the telling. Some laughed in dark humor, trust old George to find a way to drink himself to death, while others shuddered at the cruelty. Either way, the fate of George Plantagenet was sealed in more ways than one. He had become the man who literally drowned in his wine. But is that the whole truth? Or is there more to the story than the legend suggests? George's death in the wine barrel is a story almost too wild to be true. So, did it really happen that way, or is it a twisted exaggeration of history? The honest answer is that we're not entirely sure. But there are some intriguing clues. What we do know is that George was indeed executed privately on February 18, 1478, inside the Tower of London. The official records are hushed about the method. No eyewitness accounts were published to confirm the wine story. The rumor of the wine barrel execution started circulating almost immediately after his death, though, which suggests someone in the know let the secret slip, or perhaps had a dark sense of humor. One piece of evidence tips the scales towards truth. George's body was later exhumed and examined centuries afterwards, and it was noted that his head was still firmly attached to his skeleton. Why does that matter? Well, the usual method of dispatching noble traitors in those days was beheading. If George had been executed by the sword, his head would likely have been separated from his body. But it wasn't. This rules out a classic beheading and makes the unusual drowning story much more plausible. He certainly wasn't hanged either. That would have left telltale marks. So something more covert happened, and a barrel of wine fits the bill eerily well. Still, historians have debated the wine tale for ages. Could it have been a malicious joke that caught on as gossip? George Plantagenet had a bit of a reputation as a heavy drinker in life. People knew he enjoyed his wine perhaps too much. It's not hard to imagine George's enemies snickering that he loved wine so much it killed him in the end. A dark joke turned into common knowledge. In other words, the idea of him being drowned in wine might have started as a morbid metaphor that got taken literally over time. We have to consider the poisoned grapevine of medieval rumor. A jest or offhand comment could morph into legend after a few retellings. Another theory goes beyond jokes and says there was a practical reason for the story. Back then, executing a member of the royal family could be politically sensitive. King Edward IV might have wanted to dispatch his brother without the messy optics of a public execution or spilling royal blood. Drowning was seen as a somewhat cleaner method. No blood, no spectacle. It was even used in parts of Europe as an official execution technique. Perhaps Edward quietly ordered drowning to keep things discreet. And if so, choosing wine could have been a final bit of royal irony or cruelty, using a symbol of wealth and indulgence as the instrument of death. Imagine the king's cold rationale. Let the traitor die in his beloved drink. Let no blood tarnish my honor. It's a chilling thought, yet it fits the ruthlessness of the era. There's also a more logistical explanation that might have sown the seeds of the wine legend. Consider this. After George's execution, his body needed to be transported to its burial place. In those days, without modern embalming, a corpse could rot quickly on a long journey. One way to preserve a body for transport was to submerge it in alcohol, essentially pickling the deceased to slow decomposition. In fact, sailors did this with Admiral Horatio Nelson's body centuries later using brandy. To bring him home, if George's remains were shipped from London to their resting place at Tewkesbury Abbey, sealed in a barrel of wine, people who heard that detail might have mixed it up in retelling. George's body arrived in a cask of wine could easily become George died in a cask of wine. a simple misunderstanding that grew into a sensational story. We don't have proof this happened in George's case, but it's certainly possible and has been speculated by some scholars. And what about George's own family? How did they remember this grotesque end? Here's a haunting tidbit. George's daughter, Margaret Pole, later wore a bracelet with a curious charm, a tiny barrel hanging from it. Portraits of her show this little barrel charm clearly. It makes you wonder, was this her way of acknowledging her father's fate? A secret nod to the man who died in a vat of wine. The sight of that small barrel on her wrist is like a ghostly echo of the past. Perhaps it was a silent protest, or a mourning token, or even a superstitious talisman. We can only speculate, but the imagery is powerful. The legend of the wine death lived on in the very family it destroyed. Over the years, writers and artists also kept the story alive. William Shakespeare famously dramatized George's death in his play Richard III. In the play, Shakespeare portrays George, the Duke of Clarence, being stabbed by assassins and then dunked into a butt of Malmsey wine on stage. Audiences gasped at the depiction, cementing the idea of the wine barrel execution in popular culture. Even though Shakespeare took some liberties, he was working off the enduring legend that had taken root. From then on, the image of a traitorous duke meeting his end in a vat of wine became one of history's most lurid anecdotes. So, what's the truth? The most likely scenario is that George Plantagenet was indeed executed by drowning, quite possibly in wine, as the stories claim. It's a rare case where the truth and the legend align in their strangeness. But even if the method had been different, the fact remains. George's death was a direct result of his own choices in life. His betrayals, his overreach for power, and perhaps his underestimation of how cold his own family could be. In a way, the manner of his execution, true or not, symbolizes the dark irony of his life. He reached for the crown and instead got the cup of death. A toast in blood and wine to the cost of treason. George Plantagenet's saga is more than just a gory footnote in history. It's a story of ambition, family, and the gruesome depths of human cruelty. Think about the emotional weight here. A king condemns his own brother to death. A man of privilege dies in undignified terror. A once loving family is shattered by distrust and vengeance. It's the stuff of nightmares, yet it really happened. Or at least people truly believed it did. This dark tale keeps drawing us in because it forces us to confront the reality that power can corrupt and that the battles for power can lead to unspeakable ends. It's a somber reminder that historical truth isn't always heroic or moral. Sometimes it's simply brutal. And for us today, hearing this story might make us reflect on how lucky we are to live in a time where disputes aren't usually settled with a wine barrel execution. It also challenges us to question what's real versus what's legend, reminding us to take historical rumors with a grain of salt, or a glass of wine, perhaps. As you've seen, George's death by wine is one of the most bizarre episodes you'll find in the chronicles of the past. From the breathtaking hook of this video to the deep dive into George's final moments and the mystery surrounding them, we hope this journey has both fascinated and chilled you. The key takeaway is that history can be just as dramatic and suspenseful as any fiction, full of cliffhangers, twists, and enduring mysteries. George Plantagenet's choice, or curse, to be drowned in a vat of wine stands as a testament to that fact. It's a story that sticks in your mind, a cautionary tale of how betrayal can brew a bitter end. Thank you for watching and immersing yourself in this dark historical drama. If this unbelievable true story grabbed your interest, make sure to hit the like button to let us know you'd like more deep dives into history's hidden corners. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Did you know about this strange execution, and do you think it really happened as the legends say? We'd love to hear your take or any other bizarre historical tales you find intriguing. And of course, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating and chilling stories from history. We have plenty more tales of suspense, intrigue, and surprise coming up, so subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next video. Until next time, remember, sometimes the truth is not only stranger than fiction, it's darker too. Stay curious and see you in the next episode.